start with Dad.
Well, there's the gorgeous Christy.
Yeah, they're also cute.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Mom, we'll go with you first. Describe your childhood years.
Well, I was born in Arco, Idaho, and my parents were formerly from Utah. My mother was born in North Ogden and my father in Farron, and he grew up in Springville. And my mother moved to St. Anthony when she was quite young. And when they were, when I was about 5, they moved to Montana, and I have lived there ever since.
Okay, tell us about your parents.
1 second.
My mother was...
A little closer.
Yeah, that's perfect.
My mother was a very...
Start again.
Okay. My mother was raised in a large family with a father from Wales who came over when he was 16 years old. And they were a musical family. They had their own orchestra and they played at many of the dances and used to exchange instruments. My mother was very musical. She played the piano and 2 other instruments. And they used to play for many of the dances in Rexburg and the areas around there. My father was of English primarily and some Scandinavian descent. And he grew up his mother was born in Manti, and he grew up in Manti and Springville areas. He filled a mission in the southern states, and they were 3-year missions at that time. In the last year, he was the scribe for Ben E. Rich, who was the mission president at that time. And he was a graduate of Brigham Young Academy, and when he came home, at that time there were many good jobs for a person with his education in the railroad, and he became a railroad contractor. And at the time he met my mother, he was putting the railroad through up into West Yellowstone. And her family happened to have the only telephone around, and that's how they met. He went to the Richards home to use the telephone and saw this beautiful young Welch girl and decided he needed a second cook. And he had about 80 people working under him at that time, and mostly from Bulgaria, because they were good in railroad workers. And so she did not want to do that, but her mother talked her into it because this handsome young missionary was single, and she was a matchmaker. So later on they married in Salt Lake Temple on February 14th and of 1 year, I think it was 1907. Went to San Francisco on their honeymoon, and it was the year after the earthquake, so they saw all kinds of wonderful things. And then they had a guest house at a place called Playa del Rey, and went to Catalina for the remainder of their honeymoon, and then they came back and eventually lived around the Provo area, and eventually settled in Montana. And all that, I think Grandpa should continue from there.
Well, legend has it that the first Nelson that came to America was a very romantic person. And the church that they belonged to at that time, Presbyterian, I believe, had a party on an island, and a storm came up, and the boats were filled except for two people, my great-grandfather and a very winsome young girl with many features that were controversial. And so the storm was so bad they couldn't get back to get those people with their boats. So they spent the night on the island. And the rigorous or something mode of the day cast a pall upon this young couple who had spent a night, though it were certainly unintentional, on the island. So great-grandpa said the only thing I could do was to protect her name. So he married her, although he said that he had always wanted to marry a girl who could, what was that?
Cipher.
Who could both read and cipher. And my Uncle Seth told me that story years ago, and I thought it was quite charming.
But he had to stop the wagging tongue.
He had to stop the wagging tongues of Donegal, Ireland. So that's why you folks have within you, many of you, the blood of that creature who used to walk from Bountiful to Salt Lake City to peddle her butter to make ends meet when they first came to America many years ago. Now, I could tell you quite a few stories about all of those people, but I have to be careful because we only have 6 hours, isn't we have here? My parents were a very outstanding couple. My father was 2 years old when his family took him from Smithfield, Utah, up through the Helena Valley and all that country with wagon trains, and went to settle at Cardston, Alberta. And Grandpa took up a little homestead there that was up Lee's Creek, about 3 miles from Cardston. And they lived very humbly in a dugout type thing the first winter till he could build a house. And he had a rock quarry there, and he supplied many of the sandstone rocks from that quarry for the early buildings in Cardston, for the tabernacle and the government buildings and so on. And he was a strong man, and he and one of my uncles could outdo anyone in the total area in playing sticks, I think it was, where they'd lay on their back and they'd put their legs up and try to put the other man down. And no one could beat my grandpa, and I adored my grandpa. No one. And I used to run with him when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I'd have to run to keep up with him because he just walked casually. We'd go into Cascade. I remember one time when after we'd moved to Great Falls area, out at Cascade. And I remember moving, and I was only 4 years old. And that touched me to think of my grandpa.
You were born on his birthday.
I was born on his birthday. And anyway, I remember when we were going to move to Cascade, and Dad had the wagon all loaded. I can still see it. I was 4 years old, as I said, and he had a wagon, and he had a little buggy, which we called a Democrat in those years, trailed behind, and then he had he had 4 horses, I think it was, hooked up, and he had about 4 or 6 and a stallion, a big Percheron stallion. And his dad was ready to go. I says, "Dad, I can't find my stick horse." And my cousin Glenn Turner had given me a little stick horse that had 2 little handles and a cute little head on it with a horse that he'd painted. So I says, "I think I know where it is." So I can remember my dad waiting for me as I ran across down by Uncle Ren's house, where there was a little lake, and it was on the other side of the little lake and so on. And then I watched my dad go. And my mother and Val and Ruth, who were my older brother and my sister just next to me, we took the train. And I can remember coming to Cascade on that train. And you get into one of these things and people can talk for hours and hours and hours. But anyway, we settled at Cascade. Now it's Grandma's turn now.
No, I was going to say you forgot, you must tell about your mother too. It's your parents, so tell about your mom.
Oh, well, my mother's parents, they had lived in Cedar Fort, Utah, and then they had moved on over to Bear Lake, and then they ended up in Alberta, at a little town about 40 miles east of Cardston. And Grandpa had sheep, and he also had coal mines out there, and he was quite prosperous, had a lot of sheep. And then in about 1903, they had a terrible winter storm that came all down through that northern country. And Grandpa's sheep bunched up in the coulees, because sheep, when they have a terrible storm, seem to bunch up in the coulees and they smother. And they lost a lot of their sheep because they smothered. And during that terrible storm, Grandpa had been kind of sick. And so he was going out to see that the boys, the herders, a couple of his sons and some hired boys, were all right. And Grandma says, "No, you're not going. You're not well enough." He says, "Yes, honey, I'll go." And so he started out, and she went and got a big bearskin coat for him. She says, "Take this coat." And he says, "I don't want that. It'll be too burdensome." She says, "You take that coat." Well, that storm made history in Canada. It was the worst storm. It stopped the trains, and many people lost their lives in that terrible storm. And Grandpa went out, and the first night it got so you couldn't see anything. The storm was so bad you could only see about 3 feet in front of you, and nobody could tell where they were. So he had that big bearskin coat, and he hunkered down and just stayed on the ground that night. The next day he got up, and there was a little break in it, and he walked away thinking he knew where he was, and he saw one of his coal mine shafts. And he went in there and spent the next day. And then about the 3rd day, it kind of let up a little, and he found some of his herders, and they found him. And so it was all right, and they lived through it. But it was a terrible, terrible storm. And you get those storms in that country, not very often. But when a storm like that comes on and you can't see anything, and the snow piles up 3 and 4 feet deep, and the wind is whistling, you're glad you live in St. George, Utah. And so it's Grandma's turn, because I have some other things to tell you.
Okay.
I'm starting to like this.
Tell us about your teenage years.
I still want to hear about his mother, when she went to California, and then how she met Grandpa.
Mother was quite a beautiful person. She had a gorgeous singing voice, and she was an actress. And in those early years, she would go with a group of young people, and they'd travel and put on plays. And she had a great memory. She could recite poetry by the hour, and she entertained people because they loved to listen to her.
Now,
And
you recite poetry too. Can
a
you
little I
recite
could
something?
recite. Well, one of the things that she liked, remind me of something she liked.
Lady of the Lake.
no,
she
no,
could
I
do
don't want to. Let's see, what
passages
was
of
it?
that.
My sister's best fellow's most 6'3", and handsome and tall as a feller needs to be. And sis, she's so little and scrawny and tall. Small. I can hardly.
We'll give it
all.
up.
I've forgotten it. But I know quite a lot of them that I just picked up from hearing Grandma talk about.
She hardly went a day without saying a poem.
Yes,
Poem.
and she was in high demand for her singing voice. She had a gorgeous alto voice.
Tell 'em about the World's Fair.
And she sang solos at the World's Fair in San Francisco with a group of singers. So she was the head singer.
Star-Spangled Banner.
So that
and
was
that's
quite
in the
historic,
history.
you know.
She sang the verse and then all the chorus came.
But anyway, to crowd a little more in, I remember, one of the things I remember was we hauled water when we lived in Canada. And I was 4 years old, as I said. And I can remember going down to the St. Mary River, which was a little ways away from us. We had a little cistern out in front of our house where we hauled the water, and it was all cemented in and had a top on it. And we'd haul the water up, and Dad had kind of a barrel thing on the back, on a wagon, and 2 horses. And I can remember filling that wagon up with water. Dad would park out in the middle of the river, and then he'd throw his bucket out with a rope on it and fill it by hand. Then I can remember pulling out of the river up the east side of the river, headed back toward where we lived. And Dad made money by hauling water for people. And then the winter I was born, Dad went up, was a very dry year in Alberta and all over that country. And so Dad contracted to take a lot of horses by train up to the Red Deer, Alberta country, where they had better crops. And they had fields of straw that he would buy, and the haystacks, the straw stacks, and so on, and brought those horses through the winter. And Grandma, it's your turn. I've run out of steam. I'm just all shot. I'm out.
Well, I'll go on to our teenage years. He lived in Cascade, which is a little town, as Lana knows, about 35 miles or 25 miles from Great Falls. And I lived in what was called the Sun River Valley. And I went to school in Sun River and Sims, and he went to school in Cascade. And he moved to town when he was 12, and I moved when I was 16. And we met in church. Our paths had crossed before many times, but we never paid any attention to each other much. We went to, when we started high school, we had our first date when we were 17. And at that time, because of the initials of our name, it came out that we had to sit together in study hall of the desks that were kind of, not divided, but they were separated a little bit. But M and last of the M's and the first of the N's, we sat together. And one day I went up and I told Mr. Hodges, who was the coach, but he was in charge of the study period, and I said, I'm afraid I'm going to have to have you move me, because I can't get any studying done with this boy that sits by me. He wants me to coach him in learning The Cattle Thief, which was this long poem. So he said, well, you wait till the next semester, and he kind of winked at me. I think he knew I probably had a crush on him, but I still felt I shouldn't move to get any studying done. And the first date we had was to the senior ball, and he brought me pink roses, little tiny ones that I pressed in the Pioneer book. And then we always had a lot of fun. We ran with a big crowd of kids our age, and we loved to dance. And of course, now they're doing the swing dancing again, and you can see the jitterbug and all those kind of dances now on the Nickelodeon probably. And so we danced. That was our recreation. We danced all the time. And we even performed. There were 4 of us that were asked to perform at different places where we did a little jitterbug and a few swing dances. And he was very smart in school, but he didn't study near as hard as I did. But then I'd see that his grade was better than mine. And his typing, he could type 20 words faster a minute than I could. But then I went away to school. I went to Woodbury Business College in Los Angeles, and he went to work for the Utah Tailoring Mills, and so he traveled with some people from from Ogden that he still tries to see every now and then. And so we didn't see much of each other for a while, but then when we were about 20, I guess, he gave me an engagement ring, and we had planned on a nice wedding. But our teenage years were full of fun. We swam at the Y. We went to all the church events, and I'd sometimes see him, and I thought, why does he sleep in church so much? Because he said he always felt so contented when he was in church that he'd fall asleep, just like he fell asleep here. And but his mother and dad were very charming. She was the kind of woman, very outgoing, that all of her boys, three handsome young men, and she'd always come up to their girlfriends and say, "Come home to dinner with us, honey. Come on, come on, come." And they always had a lot of people around the dinner table. So that was really fun teenage years. Lots of good, clean fun, and lots of dancing.
But you had a tragedy at 16.
Yes, I didn't dwell on that because I told about it the last time. When I moved, I lost my father at 16, and I guess I didn't tell about it because I didn't want to get too emotional. After a car accident, and he lived about 72 hours, and that's when my mother, who was a widow, and I was the last child left in the family. The rest were all grown. We moved into Great Falls, and she was my best friend all the days of my life, just like my 2 daughters and daughter-in-laws are now, and their husbands. Okay.
What temple did you marry in?
Logan. And that was because his family were around there, and we would have gone to Cardston, but it was March, and we felt like it was a lot better to marry down there because all of his family could be there, and his mother was down there.
Did you ever learn the cattle feed?
They were coming across the prairie. They were galloping hard and fast, for the eyes of those English riders had sighted their prey at last, sighted him off to the eastward, where the Cree encampment lay, where the cottonwood fringed the river for miles and miles away. Mistake him never, that desperate thief, etc., etc., etc.
He knows it all, still remembers it all.
How did you resolve your differences over the years?
We didn't have too many differences because Ruthie is one of those sweet people that has a temperament that is forgiving, understanding, and loyal, courteous, etc. And she's a gorgeous creature. And we've had little differences, of course, but she's been such a wonderful person to have known. She's so brilliant. She does about 8 crossword puzzles a week and finishes every one. I've tried a few and couldn't get them done. I set them aside and said, well, I don't know the answer to several of those, but she always finishes them.
You're making
So she's
me laugh till I
probably
cry.
as well-read a person as will come down most pikes. And she's a gorgeous creature to have known and to.
That's-
Well,
Now you said that.
did I mention that?
I think one reason that we didn't have in more differences is because the conflicts that many people have, we did not have. We belonged to the same church. We had the same philosophy of life. I could have been raised in his home or he could have been raised in mine, and it would have been exactly the same routine, just like you kids are living today. And that all pays off in the end, especially if you marry someone that has the same philosophy and everything. And there were times when I would have liked to have gotten mad at him, but he made me laugh all the time. So I had that sense of humor that silly things made me laugh, and so he would always do something silly or put on some voice or take on some persona. And your dad does that now, Christy, doesn't he? I've seen him do that, so he makes, you can't stay mad. But we really didn't have anything to ever get mad at, because he loved his home and he loved his children, and above all else. So he wanted to be with us. We never had to worry. He worked long hours, but we knew that the minute that, and he always came in whistling. You girls remember that. So there were never any bad moods with him.
And he'd always come in and pinch you, and he'd say,
Yeah.
not in front of the children. Now tell us about that ring on your finger. I notice it's quite flashy.
Well, this was about my 40th wedding present. 40th or 45th, I can't remember. My 40th was a trip to Hawaii on the boat. And so probably my 45th. And we've been poor, and we've had success. And it never bothered us either way. If we didn't have anything, we didn't expect anything. And that's what comes to being a depression child. Child of depression. You know how to live poor, you know how to get along fine. You're not going to die or anything, and you're not going to starve to death. You just do what you have to do, and learn how to go to the Salvation Army if you want to change a clothes, new dress or anything. But
Which Dad has never stopped going.
no, he's still going.
Old habits die hard.
Are we getting about to the end here?
Okay, describe your feelings during World War II.
Me.
We'll start with Dad.
Well, we were spending our first year of marriage, the winter, in Palm Springs, California, with a good friend. And when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And right away, the young men that I knew at that time wanted to sign up to get into the service to fight for their country. And I didn't enlist until March after December 7, and then January, February, March. So we'd gone home by then, and I enlisted in the Army Air Force to take pilot training. And I found that I had a color vision deficiency, so I ended up being a 502, which is administrative non-commissioned officer. And we went to,
India.
I went to, well, I ended up in India after being in Bradleyfield, Connecticut, and so on it, and across the ocean down below Australia, and up along the coast of Africa to a degree.
Tokyo Rose.
And we had, Tokyo Rose was a girl who kind of went with the Japanese, and she was on the Japanese radios all the time. And she was very anti-American. And she came over the radio on our ship, named our ship the Admiral Benson. It was the name of our ship. And she predicted that we would all have a nice swim soon in the water. And there were 3 Japanese submarines that were chasing us. We could see their conning tower, whatever they call it, in the water. And we were zigging and zagging, and we were going solo because the engineers felt that that big ship was fast enough that it could outmaneuver those submarines. So, and we did. We outmaneuvered them. And about 2 days out of Bombay, India, 2 little British corvettes, they called them. They were small boats, but they had depth charges on the back. They were loaded with barrels, and they had kind of a catapult thing that they would throw those barrels off the back of those little boats. And they went all around us, and they'd throw those big barrels out, and they'd sink, and then pretty quick, boom, and they'd blast a lot of water up. And they were trying to chase away the subs, or trying to, if they got close enough, they could damage the sub beyond repair. And then we landed in Bombay, and not too long before we landed there, they had a terrible explosion in Bombay, in the harbor, that many ships, a big ammunition ship that was loaded with ammunition, and most of the ships were, and it blew up a lot of ships and the dockage, and killed a lot of people. And so we landed there and went across on the little old Indian railroads that they had no plumbing in. They just had holes in the floor, and so on and so on. And anyway, I spent about 18 months in India, and I was mainly in Calcutta with the Bengal Air Depot Supply Squadron. And many of my old companions were up in Kunming, and my old commanding in China. My old commanding officer wanted to get me up there, but they weren't having any shipments of men. They were, all transfers were frozen. But anyway, so I remember coming home, and I was out on the prow of the ship with another fellow, and I looked out and I saw this thing bobbing in the water up about 2 blocks ahead of us. And so I said to him, I says, that could be a mine. And I yelled at some of the marine people that were in charge of the boat. And when they saw that, boy, they went into action, and they put our boat, swung it way out of the line, and they told us that that was probably a magnetic mine, that had we got very close to it, that it was still floating, the war was over, but it would have blown our ship up. Probably we'd have all perished on the ocean. So it was I felt quite proud that I had been instrumental in seeing that floating mine. And then we came up, we went up by the Aleutians, got in a terrible storm up there, And I can tell you about that someday. But I remember coming up the Columbia River as we came home, which is up near Portland, and how it felt so wonderful to get close to home. And the kids were water skiing, and boy, that looked like out of this world to see kids water skiing. And so you get old, you get a little emotional once in a while, you know. I'm 81 and I've had a wonderful life, and Ruthie and I will have been married 60 years this coming May 5th. And any of you that see this know that life can be beautiful if you don't get in too big a hurry. I took a lot of time. I courted Ruthie for 4 years. Took me a long time to get her to say yes. Then I had to spirit her away. But I won't tell you about that.
Are you at the end now?
Tell us your views on frugality, being frugal in organization.
Who do you want to talk now?
Mother, you go first.
Well, we were both depression babies, as I mentioned before, and we knew the value of $1 tremendously, because we used to get $1 to buy Christmas presents for the family or something. And we go to Woolworths or Cress's, and they had all kinds of things for 15, 25 cents that now would probably cost, you know, like a pen, or anything, nail polish, anything would be, you could get it for a quarter. And but we were just both raised in very frugal homes where our mothers canned and cured their own hams, and we always had you know, we even put up our own ice and had it in sawdust in the shed, and that when we lived on the farm. But when we moved to town, of course, we lived differently. But we knew how to, if we had $5, both of us were raised the same, so we both tried to save one. We'd pay our tithing, save $1, which sometimes when you had to put something away, I bought him a ring, I know, and it took me a year to pay for it, and it was about $45. But then we realized that money isn't where it's at. If we've been successful, it's because the Lord's blessed us. Because I think we've never, money wasn't it was a means to an end. And if you like to work, you make it. And it's fun to spend, and it's nice to help other people, and we've helped a lot of people. And that was our philosophy.
Tell a little about Mom's charity, because when I think of her, I think of her as the most charitable person, and we've all discussed it, that we know.
You should tell about his own charity.
We'll talk about your own charity.
Well,
too.
she's, yeah, she just has all the qualities that they write about in books, you know. And she's just super AC good.
But
She's a good
always
person.
helped people.
I've never heard her put anyone really down. She's not, you know, she's observant and sensible, but she always tries to look for the good in people. And she's never been a gossip. She doesn't like gossips. And once in a while I have that tendency to put people down and kind of run them in the ground if I can. But Grandma always tries to look for the bright, the good in people.
And that has been the greatest blessing of my life.
I think so. It's true. You girls know this is her daughter speaking.
Parents like you.
And
Both
she
of them.
knows, yes, 2 daughters.
But
Now, Dad, tell us a little bit about your accomplishments in business.
Well, when I was quite young, I decided I want to be a paper hanger. And I got a job with my Uncle Lawrence Squires when I was about 14 or 15. And I was a paste boy. And Uncle Lawrence did things with a great flourish. He was a great artist, the most artistic man I've ever known, a beautiful person. And he and Mother used to put on plays, and he was a stagecrafter. And they'd put on plays that were far beyond the obvious ability of the area from which we sprang in Cascade. And but Uncle Lawrence used he just lapped the paper, you know, about a half-inch lap. And we won't get too long into that because I've written a story about that. I'll give it.
Go with your real estate career.
Well, you wanted to get into my real estate career. Well, all that. And then, let's see, I got into, well, I started cutting hair when I was quite young, and I was a barber. I cut hair in the back porch after they told me I couldn't do it anymore in the YMCA. And I enjoyed that. I still have people come up to me and says, I remember you used to cut my hair.
Well, I remember the haircut you gave me. And in fact, I think that
Yes,
was
but
one
you're
of the
biased,
times-
and we're not gonna go into that at this
I
point.
think that was one of the times that Mom has been upset with you.
I think so.
Can you
But
tell a little bit
anyway-
about-
No, I won't tell
Okay.
that.
Anyway, let's see what
You
I
shake
bought.
my head.
I bought 3 old root beer stands when I was just about getting out of high school, and I set 2 of them up in our hometown, and ran them for several years. And they were very summertime things. But and then I went in real estate business. I was in 1953, so I was 35 years old or so by then. And it seemed to be my cup of tea, and like the rabbit that was thrown into the briar patch, you know. And so pretty quick I was having a lot of fun in real estate. And pretty soon I had quite a few people working for me. Pretty soon I decided I wanted to build houses. Pretty soon I decided I wanted to buy different houses. Pretty soon we had about 80-some rentals, and pretty soon
And then you got
we
Mom
went on
into
and on. Then
land development.
Yeah, we built a lot of houses and had a lot. We used to take houses and rent. I could build a house for $12,000 in those years, because that's a long time ago. That'll make Lonnie even listen. And so then we started to. Rentals were a pain because you had to worry about the plumbing and all that. So we decided to get into land. I don't remember the first land we bought. But we bought land and developed some land and one thing and another. And so that's the way it went.
Tell us about your, Mom, you tell us about some of your hobbies. You worked for Dad as a secretary all those years.
Well, I was trained in business, and I went to a business college after high school, and and my father was, you might call him a real estate man, and he was always typing and asking me to help him sometimes in his office work. And then I went to work for several different, I had 3 realtors that I went to work for, and they had adjoining offices, and I took care of all their correspondence and everything. The summer that I was 18. And so that was, as far as hobbies were concerned, I was always interested in nutrition in those early days that they used to call me a food nut, because I remember once when Shelley went to school, and they asked her they were asking all the children what they had for breakfast, and she said, tiger's milk. And they said, well, what's that? Some nutrition your mother's cooked up. But anyway, they used to call me a health food nut. But that was one hobby, and I took a course that licensed me to be able to talk to a crowd if I wanted to about food and nutrition, which I did.
I
And
remember
I can
everybody
still remember some of it.
always calling you
Yeah.
all the time.
What herbs
with
are
their
good for
health
this or
troubles.
whatever. And then I was called on in my church work as the what they called the speech and drama. And I was in that for about 11 years. And then after that I taught the cultural refinement for many years. So that was always my long suit in to be around that. And I guess they'd call that my hobby.
Mother knows about every country and the people and the culture.
Yes, it is.
He's the brain.
If I just don't forget it all, you know.
Tell us about some of your horses over the years. A bit about your love of horses.
Well, we had horses from the time I was a little boy. The first horse I remember was Old Buttons, and Dad used to pile 6 or 7 kids on Old Buttons back when we lived in Canada. And I can remember one time being left on Old June, and Dad thought she was tied and she wasn't. She ran out the barn and I fell off. I can still remember that. And so we always had horses, and my father broke horses as for part of his living. So we always had a lot of broncos around. Dad would tie a team of tame horses up on the front of a wagon and a pair of broncs, and have trip ropes and a hired man to pull the trip ropes. And it's the way he broke horses, go out through a plowed field with a load on. And it wasn't long before the broncs would know what they had to do not to get thrown on their knees with the trip rope. And so Dad had a great way of breaking horses. And then I had a horse when I was a kid named Flash that we got out of the Milligan country where they ran wild. Homesteaders that had gone broke or busted would just turn their horses loose and they'd run wild up in that Milligan country. We used to go out there with some horses on horseback and try to round them up because they were free for whoever could catch them. And so we always had horses. And then when we moved to town, we had horses. And I guess right now we're not, all of our horses are gone even. We had 3 at Belt there for a number of years. This last winter, I think the last of them passed away. Abuzon, we had some Arab horses. And
That we used to show, I remember.
yeah, we showed Arabs for a while. And
Tell them about raising dogs.
we used to raise dogs. We bought a boxer, purebred boxer in Reseda when we were down in California one winter.
Female.
A female, and she was a wild dog. She killed cats and one thing and another and jumped fences. So we finally had to give her away, but we had some of her pups. Ringo we kept for years, a beautiful little boxer. And Debbie, that was a brindle boxer, I can still see her sitting up looking around and wondering what's happening. I had given her to a man who had up at Derry's Marina on Flathead Lake. And I went into that place and asked if anyone would like a good boxer. And this fellow said, I would love to have one. I told him all about her, how it was hard to keep her in town because she could jump the fence. It was about 8 or 9 feet high and go out and killed all the neighbors, a lot of neighbors' cats. she'd mangle some, she wouldn't show. But anyway, we've loved animals and we've loved horses and dogs, and I was never too fond of cats. In fact, I have kind of an allergy to cats. Cats are, I don't think the Lord really meant people to get too close to cats.
Well,
Noel knows all
we've
about
always
that.
always had a cat until the last few years, and we had some very eccentric cats. One was Tiger, that always slept on his back with his forepaws up in the air, and Simon and Solomon and Jonathan. And so even though he didn't like cats, if
put up with
one was missing, he was the one that would always go out and try to find it,
Nice.
because he knew that Noelle would be upset. But anyway, we always had a lot of people around us too. Anybody that came that wanted to come and stay to dinner, and some of them stayed for quite a long period of time. I think Joel stayed for 6 months. But we always had, my mother and his mother were raised that way, and so we always would say, well, we'll add another cup of water to the soup or something, invite these people in. But
I think it's time to take a little break.
Now, one more thing.
wait a minute, she's almost.
Dad, I remember you being president of many organizations, the Boy Scouts, and tell us a little bit about your awards in Boy Scouts.
Well, I got involved in Boy Scouts many years ago, and it was always kind of a good group of people that were involved and so on. And
President of Montana.
yeah, I was president of the North Central Council that took in around Great Falls area. And then later I was president of the Montana Council after all the 4 councils in Montana consolidated. And I think I was president of the Montana Home Builders for a while, and was active in that and the Montana Real Estate Association.
You were Realtor of the Year many times.
Well, maybe once or twice, I forgot. So we've had a good life, and now,
And you received the Silver Beaver.
yes, I got a Silver Beaver Award. My old friend Art Garber was instrumental in pushing my name forward, and so on and so on.
He was president of the, vice president of the National Association of Real Estate Boards for the nation. There were 13 vice presidents over the states, the 50 states at that time, and he was over 5 states. And it was a momentous occasion in New Orleans when they inducted it was at the big Roosevelt Hotel down there, quite close to the French Quarter, and they had, I think John Cotton at that time was the incoming president, and he was a man from Texas. And then the 13 vice presidents and their wives went up in alphabetical order while the band played. I think Al Hurt was in that band that played When the Saints Come Marching In Old New Orleans. Tradition.
Now, I remember Dad always saying, I can't stand a liar or a cheat. Can you tell us a little bit about
He
your
still
views on
says
honesty?
that.
Well, I think most of us feel that way about life. And sometimes people get a reputation that is not deserved, so you have to be careful when you hear things, because gossip sometimes pins labels and characteristics on people that may not be true. So you have to be awfully careful to walk in another man's shoes not know exactly what the cause is of all the gossip that may be let go. We're seeing that now on a national scale. That
In this presidential.
between both political parties are accusing the other of dastardly
Inventing the
moves.
internet.
So anyway, down the road you go.
We to the end, no.
If you had anything to do differently, what would you do?
Hindsight is beautiful. It's 2020. There are several things I do differently. Conrad Hilton says the secret to my success is that I
Sold.
always sold too soon. Well, his success was great, and he always sold too soon because he didn't hold it too long and go broke, I guess. But if he sold too soon, he missed a lot too. So I think there was quite a little humor in that saying of his, that he always sold too soon. But because of his stature in life, even though he sold too soon, he had great success. So who's to argue with a man that says his success is that he sold too soon? Because it sounded like he would have been better off had he held. But
Then if you had nothing in life, we also have a little saying from a gentleman that's
I bargained with life for a penny. No, that's not it.
Bless, nothing.
Oh, I see. Blessed is nothing. You don't have to paint it. You don't have to pay taxes on it.
Fix the plumbing.
You don't have to fix it up, and you don't have to worry who gets it when you go. And that's it is kind of a cute saying that in life, if you learn how to live with what you have and not get too expressive or demanding in your tastes, happiness comes really from within. And if you can live frugally and meet your obligations, you're a lot better off than if you try to be, get too flamboyant in your desires.
And my memories of you are that you were very frugal with yourself, but with Mother you were very generous. And you'd always say, I'd live in some old shack, but this house is for your mother.
I tried to get your mother to move with me in the cone cart. I had a little cone cart. And it was a little old Ayrshire dairy wagon with steel wheels. And I said, we could have a bed fixed up here, and I've got the cooker in the front. We could cook foot-long hot dogs and corn on the cob and still have the ice cream on a stick, dipped in chocolate, rolled in nuts. What more can we want? But that was always with a little humor that I tried to. But I really think that had she called my bluff, that I would have moved her into a cone cart.
I think on that note, we should ask how many more.
Now, one thing I remember, Dad, when you'd write me letters, and Mom, you'd always include a little poetry. Dad, can you recite Bloody but Unbowed?
Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell swoop of circumstance, I have not flinched nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with circumstance the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Hi-ho the fox. That's a good place to...
It's a
Your
good
last
point to
words.
end on.
Maybe it's a brief festival, Mom.
Well, we feel like our faith and the gospel is what made our lives what it is today. And we've been successful, but we know that it's because we've been blessed. If we had lived a different lifestyle, and we wouldn't have been, and we know that we've been poor and we've been rich, and rich is better. But but when we were poor, we had children that thought they were quite royal because we loved them so much and told them all the time how wonderful they were, and we still know that they're just perfect, and we're very fortunate in that they married people that we love just like our own. Thank you, Lonnie.
Yes, that was nice. Well, Grandma, we have to kiss one for the road.
Okay.